At this moment, we're going to invite Darius Gibbons to read scriptures for us and to provide reflections.
Good afternoon, church. The scripture reading I'm reading, it's called The Persistent Widow. And he spake a parable unto them to the end that they outright always to pray and not to faint, saying, there was a city, a judge, who feared not God, regarded not man, and there was a widow in that city. She came unto him, saying, avenge me of my adversary. And he would not, but for a while. But afterwards he said within himself, oh, I fear not God, nor regard man. Yet because this widow troubleth me, I will avenge her, lest she wear me out by her continual coming. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge saith, and shall not God avenge his elect, that cry to him day and night? And yet he is long-suffering over them. I say unto you, that he will avenge them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on earth. That's it. Well, I think that it's like in the story how it's about the widow. She was persistent, right? And I think that's what we should do as well, because like thinking about today with all the racism and injustice that's going on, I think we should also be persistent and true, but not in a violent way, not in a way that could hurt other people, but we should be persistent in ways that could benefit us, but not hurt others. So yeah, I just wanted to, it's just stay true to yourself, but don't do it in a way that's violent or could hurt others, and be determined. Thank you.
Thank you, Darius. That was a wonderful reflection on that scripture, and I'm glad that you shared it with us. I always especially in moments of tension and crises, to give God thanks. And I know people aren't necessarily prepared to always give a testimony, but at this moment, if there's anyone that has a testimony burning on their hearts to share, let's raise your hands or use the raise hand feature, or just wave. We'll unmute you and we'll take a testimony or two.
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's continue the program then. At this moment, we wanted to share a video that's a bit kid-friendly that explains the issue of systemic racism to get us started. So at this moment, we're going to share that video, and then we're going to get into a few questions after that.
Deja, we can't hear it.
Are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire Black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny Black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, Black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with Black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the Black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
So we're going to have time to discuss the issues that were raised in this video a little later, but right now I want to actually introduce Julaine and mention that we're really proud as a church of Julaine and Deja and all the graduates that we honor today, but especially the two of them right now for their leadership in AY, especially in this program. They're the reason we're having this program. They're the inspiration for this program. And I'm happy for the support that we're seeing right now for them. At this moment, Julaine is gonna offer her reflection for why we're having this program and introduce one of our speakers.
Well, thank you for that. And so today we're going to be talking about social justice, I feel, especially in how it has to do with Black people in this country and how they're treated and just racism in general. Right now there's a lot of there's outrage in this country for the deaths of, you've heard their names, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. There's so many people out there. And it's been very overwhelming to experience, especially in the last 2 weeks. So I think it's good that we can come as a church family and talk about it and discuss it. and really understand what's going on. And we have two Seventh-day Adventist scholars here to talk about it with us, and I will be introducing Mr. Janssen Evelyn. So he works in county administration for Howard County government. A lawyer by education and trade, Janssen practiced law in Maryland as a civil litigator in both the private and public sectors for 10 years before being appointed to his current role by Howard County executive. A community activist, Janssen serves on the executive board for the Howard County chapter of the NAACP, the Howard County Conservancy, which focuses on environmental stewardship, and earlier this year was appointed by Governor Larry Hogan as a commissioner on the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. An active member of New Hope SDA, he is an adventurous teacher and manages the church's garden. Janssen originally hails from Barbados and grew up in Maryland after emigrating to Boston for a few months. He is the husband of the splendid Sonia Evelyn, who is the highest ranked female at ADRA. Sonia is a native of Sierra Leone, and together they have two amazing daughters, Simone and Sinclair. And next, Deja will introduce Uncle David.
Yes, I will be introducing David Court, who I've always referred to as Uncle David. But
Speak up a little bit, Deja.
oh, sorry, I'll restart. But I'm introducing David Court, who I've always referred to as Uncle David for all the years that I've known him. But Dr. David Court is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and senior lecturer at the Walter Sisulu University in Mthatha, South Africa. A lifelong Seventh-day Adventist, he was born in Jamaica, West Indies, but grew up in Guyana, the Commonwealth of Dominica, Queens, New York, and Detroit, Michigan. He currently serves as head worship coordinator for the Tacoma Park Seventh-day Adventist Church, where he also assists with the church's social justice outreach activities. David is the husband of the beautiful Guyanese native, Leanne Johnson, and the father of their precious daughter, Maddie, who was born in Massachusetts.
Thank you, Deja and Julaine. Want to make one more public service announcement to say that we're recording this program. We have one more child who's on that we need a consent for. Kathleen, I don't know if you saw my chat, but we'll need consent to continue recording. You can type it in the chat. In the meantime, let's get started with the I'll resolve that offline, but let's get started with the quiz, Deja.
So we are going to be doing a little AY trivia, and we're going to be asking a couple questions in regards to different vocabulary terms that are used when it comes to social justice. And we're really encouraging the youth to share their opinions and what they think the right answer is. And then at the end of each question, we encourage our guest speakers to share their expert opinions of what they feel the correct definition is. So I will begin. So the first question is, what is race? And these are kind of options of what sometimes comes to mind. So read these over, and then any youth who would like to share which one they think and why, just unmute yourself and share. I mean, I know all the youth because I am a youth, so I'll start calling you out one by one if you want me to. I'll start with my sister. Nia, I know you're on here somewhere.
I would go with like C maybe.
Why do you think C?
Because like I don't know, like they're like I don't really know. I just thought that was like the best answer.
Is it because you feel like you share common like cultural
Yeah.
aspects of your life with like your friends who are Black as well?
Yeah.
All right. Is there any other youth who would like to share what they think their answer is, if they agree with that answer?
I can go ahead. I'm pretty sure it's E, because I remember reading a long time ago that race cannot be exactly scientifically proven, that you can't exactly group everyone into a certain category based on genetics, and that race was developed by society to put forward some ideas, whether positive or negative. So yeah.
Okay, can the experts share their opinion as to what they think the answer is?
I will defer to Dr. Court.
Janssen, stop calling me that. I'm Uncle David.
We need both of you to give an answer, but we'll start.
Okay, I'll go first.
Yeah.
First, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for allowing me to take part in your AY service. It's refreshing to see my good friend Jeremy Matthews. After Sabbath is over, you can talk to him about his many defeats by me on the tennis court. But to answer this particular question, the answer, and I believe the prior commentator stated, the answer is E. A label that society forces on categories of people that have similar biological features, skin colors, textures, etc. I mean, and we actually have to go no further than the federal government. Right now in 2020, we're doing the census, and in the census, even on census.gov, there's even a section on frequently asked questions where they talk about race, and they literally say the racial categories included in the census questionnaire generally reflect a social definition of race recognized in this country, and not an attempt to define race biologically, anthropologically, or genetically. So, and it actually goes on to say more, but that just goes to show you that race, particularly here in America, and it's spread throughout the rest of the Western world, but race is a social construct that was created. And I'm not going to go on for too long, but if you were to look at, there's a book called Stamped from the Beginning, and there's a young adults version that I would strongly recommend to all the youth that are on here, and it details the history of how race was constructed in the 15th and 16th century, and it's a direct tie to the questions or the topics and the issues that we're facing today. David.
I have nothing else to add. Race is a social construction. Janssen mentioned in this country, if you think about race, the reason why it's socially constructed is because it means different things across society. So if you think of, I have friends from Brazil, and the concept of race means something different to them in that country. And so that is exactly why the answer is E.
Deja, one quick question. So David, I need you to tell me how you would explain social construction to Maddie, because I don't think I would have understood it. I think
right. So if I were talking to Madison, I would say that race is something that is made up by people who you interact with every day so that they can understand what group they belong to. But it has nothing to do with who you are when you were created by God. That's what I would say.
Thanks. Go ahead, Deja.
Okay, so our next question is, what is racism? And these, I don't know why the computer's doing that, but these are some of the possible, the possible answers. And also, if you see something in here that you think should be added, or you don't see what you would choose as the answer, then you can share that as well. And I'm encouraging the youth again to answer. And I mean, if the youth doesn't want to answer, adults, by all means, share what you think.
I can go ahead and say I want to say C. Just ideas of, well, since race is a social construct, just having ideas of an entire group of people based on race that are frankly not true. And yeah, what C says basically.
Anyone else?
You know, Deja, I'm so sorry. I was typing out my consent that I didn't hear the question. I don't know if you could review real quickly for me, please.
Oh, the question is, what is racism?
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
For me, I think it's E, because all of them are things you can do to just like put another race down or put a group of people down just because of how they look or act or just their beliefs. I think the answer is E.
Alrighty, experts, please weigh in your opinions.
I would
David,
say it's,
you go.
Yeah, I would say it's E, and I'll explain what I mean one by one. When one person dislikes another person, that is a consequence of something they believe or think, right? That is an example of racism, right? When somebody uses the N-word, that also is an example of racism. When people think, act on that belief, right? When people think, act on, or support a belief system that one group is better than another person, that is also an example of the concept that we're talking about. And then, of course, ultimately what people understand racism to be is slavery. But racism is all of those things, and it's also much more. And the way you think about this is that, if you were alive in 1914, or is it 1912? I can't remember. And the Titanic sank, right? The Titanic hit this iceberg, and what they could see was this thing above the water, but what they could not see was a whole mountain of ice below the water. And I use that analogy to say that racism is an entire thing, and the things that you can see represent A, B, C, and D. And they are all of those things, but but it's often more than that.
I would slightly, the words not disagree because David's correct. I would actually say, going back to the Titanic example, A, B, and D are the things you see above the water. Whereas if you were to look at just a straight up definition of what racism would be, we would then, it's the belief essentially that different quote unquote races, or that humans are subdivided into different groups known as races that are different in their behavior, and that they have different innate capacities that we can view as either superior or inferior. If you look at the Third Reich, Adolf Hitler, he had the belief that the white man, particularly the Aryan, Anglo-Saxon, were a superior, they had a higher intellect, whereas a belief system that is perpetuated is that Black people may not necessarily have the highest intellectual capacities, but physically they tend to be superior. So I would say that when one person from one race hates another because of their race, yes, that's a racist action. When they use the N-word, they're using it in a derogatory way to indicate that they are above and this person that's being called the N-word is beneath. When one race is held in bondage as slaves and they're denied rights, they're not even viewed as humans, that's because you believe that these people are inferior and that you're helping them. That you've probably heard of Rudyard Kipling, The Jungle Book. Well, he wrote a poem called White Man's Burden, in which he theorized, or he stated in his poem, that it was the obligation of the white man to go out and essentially colonize all of these inferior races. So I would, if I had to pick, I would say yes, all of them are examples of racism. However, C is the, I would say, definition of racism, I would say, on a just broad level.
I would agree. I would also phrase it, because I agree, I would say that A, B, and D are consequences of C. Right. So when you have C, then what follows as a consequence is A, B, and D.
Okay, so next question. What is systemic racism? We kind of watched a video on this, so I feel like lots of people, younger people, can share their opinion because we just watched a video on it. So, I don't want to call people out. I only called out my sister because she's my sister. But, I mean.
You have my permission to call out Kara.
Okay, Kara, you're up.
You can give consent to call out our kids.
Kara, it's your go. Give us your yes.
I think it's B.
Why do you think, if you care to share, why do you think it's C?
Well, I said B.
Oh, B, sorry. I heard C. My fault.
Well, based on the video and how they talked about like what happened in the past, the government, well, they both B and C, I feel like, are pretty similar. So maybe, I'm not completely sure, but
All right, did anyone else wanna share? I know it's kind of confusing because D is I don't really know, and then there's all of the above. But if you're thinking all of the above, just ignore I don't really know. Okay. Just putting that out there.
Enough to be included in the young people since I'm an adult, but I think that it's A, B, and C because I think that an organized form of racism is also like that's what the government is doing. Like they're very organized in their way of keeping us or keeping people of color or Black people kept down in a way that they can't. Like I don't know the exact words to say it, but I just think it would be A, B, and C, just especially because of what the video explained to us.
All right.
Can I add on to that as well?
Yeah.
I'm saying a lot because I think about this stuff basically every day. So A, B, and C, I do agree with that. Just like the way that it's systematic is that the system is built to keep you down. So it's the way that like the housing situation, not providing correct housing, and then the policing situation where they try to get as many Black people, just like any kind of thing on the record, and then higher up the chain just to get like a high profile job. They'll ask you, oh, have you been arrested before? And that cuts a lot of Black people out, just being arrested for literally nothing. So it's hard to rise up. And then just having white people hiring, and they have no discretion. They just like know Black people, or in their mind, they're like, oh, the idea is Black people are just not as good. So every facet, every level of society, of the society or of the system, there's resistance to push us down. And that's basically, yeah, A, B, and C.
All right, experts.
Janssen, you want to go?
Sure. They're correct. When you look at what systemic or before systemic became in vogue, it used to be called institutionalized racism. And when you look at that original term, institutionalized racism, then automatically A, B, and C fall into that. because it is very organized. I mean, Jeremy and David know I'm a huge sci-fi anime geek, and when you look at from a sci-fi perspective, The Matrix, I always use The Matrix when I'm explaining institutionalized or systemic racism. It's all around us, and it's only once we become aware of it that we start to see it. And that's why that video is an excellent primer into what institutionalized or systemic racism is, because you see how it affects so many levels, including generationally. And when you look at when you look at the Holocaust, that occurred over 60 years ago. Yet, I have many Jewish brothers and sisters, their children who are the same age as my children, they understand the impact of the Holocaust, and they always say, never forget. You look at September 11th, and they always say, never forget. But then we have 400 years of one, slavery, then Jim Crow, then and then separate but equal. And yet they say, we need to move on. And it's because we've had these systems in place for centuries. That's why it becomes critical to understand how these systems work so that we can dismantle them. And housing redlining is a huge one. But it's even deeper than that, because even in places where they wouldn't overtly redline a house or depress a property value, or an area where you had large groups of minorities, particularly blacks, and then they would urbanize it or ghettoize it and depress the values, and therefore you would have substandard policing, substandard education. Even before all of that, you had restrictive covenants. Many of you, if you live in suburbs that were historically predominantly white, if you went back and look at your deeds, like they're not enforceable anymore, but there were restrictive covenants that were in place where they said this development is you're not to have people of African descent in there, including people who were mixed. So that's the example of just how institutionalized racism operates. I'll shut up now, but just even going back to World War II, because the World War II, the post-World War II generation is literally how this systemic racism really planted its roots. You had Black people going off to fight, dying. The ones that came back, they didn't have access to the GI Bill. The GI Bill helped white soldiers go off to college. Then they had access to loans. The Black soldiers didn't have that. And so like just that example shows you how about one or two generations from there, like the impacts of this systemic racism can continue to affect. David?
Yes. That's all I have to add. I would add nothing.
Can I add a little something, please?
Of course.
Okay. By the way, for the record, I'm not adding it as an expert, as the two experts, but just my own thought. Quickly, I wanted to say that I favor choice number C, particularly when I look at the fact that it starts off with when a government, now a system is a way of things, and systemic, of course, comes from the root word system. It's a way of doing things. A government, which would be a power body or someone in authority, can impose a system and also enforce a system. And government or that governing or power body can enforce or impose a system either overtly or covertly. But it seems to me as though there's always someone who think that they have the final authority, maybe the absolute power or greater power, more than everyone else. And therefore they have the right to impose this system. And therefore I think that it is a deliberate thing. Systemic racism is deliberate, but might be overt, might be covert, but it's clearly something that is deliberate. People know exactly what they're doing and they know the purpose for which they're doing it. And quickly, I heard one commentator say that one of the ways that racism may end or could end in this country is for those who think themselves to be the authority or in power to give up that power and let someone else share equally. And in a big way, racism could end that way, but that's a hard thing for those who are in power, think they are superior, to give up.
So the next question is, what does it mean to be anti-racist? These are the answers. Anybody like to share their opinion? I mean, I'll share mine, since no one wants to. But personally for me, like my brain kind of just goes like the basics of like the word, like anti being not, and the word racist, so not racist, but I feel like it definitely has a deeper meaning, and that's where I need to like educate myself. But if anyone else would like to share, Jelaine.
Oh my goodness, I'd love to like answer this question. So I think that the answer might be A, C, and D. But I think like you could also even add just being involved in everything that you can be. Like, I personally think that this was actually a question I was going to ask, but I think that there's a difference between being like you're not racist or you're anti-racist. So you're actively like not being racist, but you're also trying to help spread the word that you shouldn't be racist, and you should be helping people that need your help, like minorities that need assistance, to prove, like not even to prove, but to just, I don't know, be a decent human being. For example, there have been a lot of petitions. I feel like you can be non-racist and realize there's an issue and not sign any petitions and not donate any money and not spread any awareness. Or you can be anti-racist and see if there's a problem and like do that work. I don't know if that makes sense. That's what I would qualify you as, like an anti-racist versus a non-racist.
You've been given some interesting answers. Ari, you have an answer to this one too?
I was gone for like 2 minutes there, but I saw the question, and from what I heard of Jelaine's answer, I do agree, because by putting the prefix anti on it means like a force against. So that bystander thing that a lot of people like to do is saying, oh yes, Black Lives Matter, period. Like nothing, they do nothing. That doesn't help the anti, like the pushback on racism. So to be anti-racist, you have to be actively like anti-racist. So you have to, like when you see injustice, like if you are white, use your privilege to go against that. And exactly that. Just you have to actively be anti-racist. I try not to use the actual word, but like that's what it is.
Experts.
Janssen and David, before you answer, I thought this is an extremely important question. I just learned this word after I read Stamped from the Beginning, which is the book that Janssen mentioned. I can't believe I just kind of understood this better. So I want you guys to explain it really, really simply as possible, but then also go into as many layers as you need to.
I'll let David go then.
I think it's D. Janssen, what do you think?
It's absolutely D.
Yep.
And only D.
Yep. So the best way I could think about it is that to be somebody who is anti-racist, you have to understand what the system is and how it's constructed. And then you have to be against the building blocks of the system. So you're not only against what people think and what they do, but you're also against how they wield power. And they wield power with policy. And then you have to understand what policies those power entities are wielding. And once you do that, then you're actually against the entire system. So it's also a being against the acts, the thinking, and the policies. And that's exactly what anti-racist means. When you label somebody an anti-racist, what you're saying is this person deeply understands what's afoot. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I would just join David and say that if you are true, if you look at A, I know many people that's like, look, I hate racism, or I'm not racist. I've had coworkers and colleagues that have been like, I don't see color. Well, that's the opposite then of reality, because when you walk into a room, when I used to practice law and I'm meeting my client in court, I'm not going to say, hey, look for the guy with glasses. I'm going to say, look for the black guy with a beard that's bald-headed. Then they're like, oh, there you are. You see, so seeing color or seeing differences, that's not inherently racist. It's when you then see those differences and use those differences to subjugate or to put down someone. So when it says working actively against racist policies and thinking, that means you have to also, it's not just, oh man, look at this law, or look at this policy, or look at the school to prison pipeline. It's not just that, it's looking at yourself. I mean, Michael Jackson said, like, I'm looking at the man in the mirror and I'm asking him to change his ways. And to touch on a comment that someone posted in the chat, like, growing up as an immigrant in America, the worst insult in my house, and my family used to wield it like a knife that used to cut me. Like, you're acting like a Black American. Like, that's a racist sentiment. And I love my parents, but it was a racist sentiment. But it used to, and I used to hold it, and it was one of those things where, like, give me lashes, that doesn't bother me. But when you say, oh, you're acting, but how could I not? Like, I grew up in the culture. So yes, like, once you start to realize their policies, their actions, their you got to start looking at your thinking. And a lot of us, first generation or immigrants, we hold on to some of those ideas, particularly when we look at another group. I mean, we hold on to some of them in our own section of diaspora. We hold on to some of them. I mean, it's unfortunate when you hear some people talk about other islands in a pejorative, in a demeaning manner. But yet some of these other islands, the stuff they've done, like use, for example, Haiti. I mean, so many people talk negatively about Haiti, but Haiti is the only society in the history of humanity that have ever had a successful slave revolution. You see TV shows about Spartacus, you see movies about Spartacus, but the only successful slave revolution in the history of humanity has been Haiti. So then, if you want to talk about systemic racism, look at what happened to Haiti. France cut them off. The US cut them off because the US owed France money for funding the American Revolution. Therefore, now America has their own, they don't want the slaves in America to hear that slaves somewhere else freed themselves. So it's like, you know what? I am not going to trade with you. I'm not going to recognize you as a sovereign country. So neither did England, neither did Spain, neither did Portugal. And as a result, you have no way to trade. So then the people in Haiti had to utilize their resources. And then France, after a couple of years, after they got smashed by Haiti, they didn't come back with a whole armada. And then they entered into a treaty where Haiti is like, you're free, but now you have to pay 75% of anything that you make over to France. And this is no lie, but Haiti was paying that up until the 1930s and 40s. So like, that's systemic racism. So to actively work against those things, you have to understand the history. Like, there's an African term, West African, it's called Sankofa. And it says to understand where one is going, one must understand where one is coming from. Like, you have to understand these systems. And that's the only way you can dismantle them.
Oh man, that was really good. I just want to add, especially for the youth, right? Growing up, just like Janssen gave his example of being called a Black American as an insult. You know, I've had Black people watch me speak or watch how I write and say, you're acting white, you're talking white, right? That's racist thinking, right? That's saying that group is superior. So yes, it goes both ways. If you think a group is superior, they're smarter, they do things better, that's definitely racist thinking. So Black people can have racist thinking too. And so I think it really starts for us to make sure that we don't have racist thinking about ourselves or about anyone else.
Oh. So the next question, we've heard it a lot. It's on my shirt, but what does Black Lives Matter mean, and like what is the movement about? So please share. It's been all over social media. So everybody who has a cell phone, I'm sure you've seen something. It's been on the news. So I know everybody can weigh in some type of opinion.
I actually have gotten into some social media arguments with some folk, well, conflicts. And I am having a hard time asking God to work on me to not have the negative feelings that I'm having about some people.
Amen.
But yeah, so this Black Lives Matter thing, this woman, I wanted to hit her. I don't want to see her. I thought I was going to see her this week and I wasn't ready. And praise God, her husband came and not her. So I didn't have to deal with that. But, you know, so I'm challenging, and there are these white women who are hardcore Trump supporters who are, anytime you mention anything about, all they had to talk about was the riots, which I prefer to call protests and rebellions. That's all they had to talk about. And I said, okay, well, can we talk about the murders? And I talked about, you know, Black lives, valuing Black lives. Black bodies should not be discounted and just considered as disposable. And did she not have to respond to my thing by saying, all God's children matter? And I had to tell her, no, I'm sorry, prove it to me. Prove it. Show me where the Black bodies are valued as much as anybody else, and then we can make that statement true. So I got into it. So what else did you guys experience with regards to the Black Lives Matter? I had to explain to her, you know, there's nice little pictures that you can put out there telling folks, we're saying Black Lives Matter. We don't think that only Black Lives Matter. It's all lives matter. Yeah, we know that. But until you value one of the all can't matter. So, you know, all right, done talking.
Can I throw a monkey wrench into this whole operation now, though? Can I throw a monkey wrench into this?
Go ahead, Lou.
So now, let me play devil's advocate. All right? Because this is what I hear. You all are worried about Black Lives Matter, right? When the police are killing y'all. But what about when you all kill one another? What about, do Black Lives Matter then? I'm sorry, my wife is yelling at me, don't get loud. Do Black Lives Matter then? Do Black Lives Matter when you're shooting each other? And of course, they always revert back to Chicago. They always go back to Chicago. What about Chicago? You guys are killing each other over there. What difference does it make? All right? So I pose the question there. Do Black Lives matter when we're killing one another? Do Black Lives really matter? Just playing devil's advocate.
David and Janssen. Let's go to David and Janssen, maybe.
Mm-hmm. So the best way I could describe, first of all, the answer is E, right? And the best way to think about this is if Leanne came, if we had an argument, and which we never have, of course, right? And she said, David, do you love me? And I said, of course. I love everybody. What am I saying when I say that? right? Or if she says, "Do you love me?" and I say, "Well, you know, I love my aunt because she lives in a bad neighborhood and she witnessed some things, and you know, I just want to support her. So I love her, and I also love you." What I'm suggesting is that I'm not answering the real question. The real question is, how much do you value me, right? And and people who are in power and people who are used to privilege are used to seeing themselves in a privileged light all the time. So when you ask them to step out of that privilege and see if somebody else matters, it's very difficult for them to do that. Right? So that's why Joyanne's coworker had such a hard time with the concept of a minority mattering, because she is so used to a minority not mattering in her own mind that she doesn't really realize it. Right? So she's actually offended that you even think you have the gall to say that your body is important, right? And I actually didn't realize this until I hung out in South Africa, right? And what I mean by that is that the Boers and the Afrikaans are used to thinking that they matter more. So as soon as you say that Zulus and Xhosas matter, then they think what you're really saying is that I don't, you know, I'm used to being on top and like, you know, I'm not there anymore. And you're saying that I don't matter. And really what they're saying is that I'm not used to, I'm not used to being out of power, and privilege is something that I've always been used to. So really, when people talk about Black Lives Matter and people are objecting to that, the real issue is a language of privilege. And once you understand that, then you understand the objection.
Hi, it's Esther. Just want to jump in here. I agree with all the views so far. Another example of that I experience is a Caucasian individual in power, a nurse, saying, "I just want to go on the front line and say healthcare workers matter because we're all going to get COVID again." And I saw that as totally disregarding the issue, minimizing it, and want to lash back and not acknowledge that there's a problem.
And don't get me started on that, because I am so tempted to tell all of the people who, it's usually the people, the All Lives Matter folk, who believe that this COVID thing is a hoax. And I say, you go and please go and work in the hospital, but let's don't get off on a different subject.
I like Miss DA. But just to quickly answer the question, I know David said that. Did you say D, David, or did you say E?
I said E, as in Evelyn.
Okay, so I guess I slightly disagree, because while okay, David, understand on an abstract level what David is saying, because D is an incomplete answer. Of the question, of the choices presented to us, D is the closest one to being accurate, but it is I view it as a bit of an incomplete answer, because the lady that spoke before Miss Joyanne actually touched on it. Like, ultimately, what Black Lives Matter means, it's a direct confrontation into whether you hold conscious or subconscious racist thought, or whether you are consciously anti-racist or trying to be anti-racist. Because if you say Black Lives Matter, that's not exclusionary. That doesn't mean that other lives are inferior. It's simply saying you can't say all lives matter until Black lives matter just as much as these other lives. Because in the history of America, in the history of Western society, white lives they've always mattered. Asian lives didn't matter that much, but now they're the model minority, so they matter more than Black lives. Latino lives matter just a bit more than Black lives. You see, so it's like there's a scale. So until we get to the point where their lives, like all lives, are really mattering, you can only do that with if Black lives matter. And there's a, so my pastor at my church touched on a sermon today. It was done virtually, so it was all COVID safe, but he touched on something, and this is a white male, and he's wrestling with this. And he said, he used, now, I don't know how conservative liberal this church is, so I'll say it very, very clear. Oh, so a comment just said, Black lives in their eyes are always the bottom of the barrel. That's correct. This system was founded on a caste system, and Blacks were the lowest part of that caste system. And until we completely destroy that caste system, all lives can't matter. But a good example to think about it. Now, I know that this parable is dealing with salvation and how the shepherd, when he lost his sheep, he went out to find that one sheep. That's how Jesus will go to such efforts to save you. But for the purposes of illustrating Black lives matter, the white lives are the 99 sheep. The Black lives are the ones that, it's that lost sheep. It's the sheep that in society is viewed as subhuman, substandard. And so like, that's what the shepherd is going out to find. And then if you look at that verse, to take that analogy to its all the ways to its conclusion, he even said, the shepherd says, Jesus says this, the 99 sheep, no, the one lost sheep is worth more. So, I mean, I'm not going to take that verse to this extreme and say that Black lives matter more than any other lives, but the reality is until all lives are mattering, like until Black lives matter just as much as all lives, we have to take every effort to be anti-racist and to dismantle these systems. And to quickly answer my brother that posed the devil's advocate question on black crime, let's be very real about something. If I lived in some trailer park in some bodunk park that was majority white, most of the crime that would occur there would be white on white.
Correct.
If I lived in Chinatown, most of the crime that would occur there would be Asian on Asian.
Correct.
If I live in Chicago, in the inner city of Chicago, it's inherently going to be Black on Black crime, because this is why. People, I don't care how criminal you are, don't just walk up and, you have some deviance, but most people don't just walk up to people and say, you know what, I'm just gonna kill you. No, you have stolen my product, you have disrespected me in some stupid juvenile way, and so I react with violence. But it's against someone you know. Most crime is on people that is against people that you know.
Correct.
So it's inherently white on white, Black on Black, or if you're in a very mixed area, it could be whatever on whatever. So the Black on Black argument, like, it's silly. Since we're in church, it's a very silly argument.
It's not a sufficiently anti-racist argument.
Correct.
But I just want to ask you guys, though, that there's a lot of Black people who say these things on social media and, on other places like Fox News. Like, what's the deal with that? I was going to say, David mentioned the point about privilege. There are people who are not privileged that are saying these things.
So you're right. There are many people that say that, but I would revert to, and granted, he was not an Adventist, but he was still a prophet that was dropping some gems. I would reference Brother Bob Marley. In his song, he said, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. Until we do that, until we free our mind, like, that's it. Like, it's mental slavery that these people are in. And so when you talk about the Candace Owens that are cooning for the people on Fox News, one, they're getting a paycheck. They're absolutely getting a paycheck. That's why they're doing this. But they're just coons, and it's because they're stuck. Yeah, Diamond and you see. So at least Candace Owens can kind of put together a stream of thought. Like, Diamond and Silk are just straight up. Like, I mean, you remember Sambo? They're straight up Sambo.
Jeremy, can I just
words, you can't put those names out there.
Can I add something, Jeremy?
After Handel adds, Deja, we could go to the next one, but go ahead, Handel.
Yes, I'll be very quick. Listen, I wanted to say, when you consider that statement, Black Lives Matter, and it's been around with us for a while now, and there's a big reason for it to be around. However, I'd like us to, not necessarily now, but from here on, let's see if we could finish that statement. Let's look at it this way: Black Lives Matter, and can we say because, or this is the reason? Can we add? Finish the statement. Finish the sentence. It may be that the extensions to that statement could be numerous, and I believe if we were able to complete carefully, intelligently that statement, why Black Lives Matter, if it's 1,000 extensions to it, we are able to list them all. I think then the point will be a lot clearer, because all we have is a statement, Black Lives Matter. Some people understand it well, some don't quite, and that's the reason why. We should find the extension, Black Lives Matter, and then all the reasons why.
Hey, Jeremy.
I want Janssen to respond. Okay, go ahead, Brenda. Brenda, jump in.
Let the other, someone respond, let them respond.
So I tend to disagree a
Totally.
little bit with Handel, because I think the statement is complete. I don't think we have to give any other reason other than our lives matter. I think by adding a semicolon is almost like adding because or a but our lives matter, that's it, period, full stop. I don't think we have to give any additional reason as to why. We've already given enough reasons why our lives matter, because we're equals.
Well, you see, I agree with that. You and I understand that, Brenda, but the point is that that's the reason why someone earlier said that statement is made and then nothing happens after that. Anybody can put up a big sign and say Black Lives Matter, but does it go deeply down for them, and do they really understand the 1,001 reasons why?
So if I can just jump in very quickly, I guess what I have to agree with the lady that just spoke, because we're not even saying Black lives are equal. We're literally just saying they matter. Like, they matter. They're important. We exist. Like, so we should not have to qualify it and say Black lives matter because we have families and we are humans as well. Like, I mean, it's like, if you don't get that, that means that you have to figure out which side of the equation do you fall on, whether it's conscious or subconscious racism or intentional anti-racism. Because if you are anti-racist, the statement Black Lives Matter has no impact negatively on you. Like, there's no need to say Black Lives Matter because look at me, I have kids. Look at me, I have some education. Look at me, I have a mother and father. Like, there's no need to say, thank you, whoever just said that, justify. There's no need to justify my existence. Like, I have every right to be here. However, the system that was initially founded said I was 3/4. So now Black Lives Matter is a complete rebuttal to the 3/4. Like, no, we matter. We matter just like everybody else. And until we matter, no one else. Did I say 3/4 or 3/5? Yeah, I think I said 3/5. But yeah, like, until they matter, that's it. So there's no, I think when we get into the statement of trying to qualify it for an audience that is inherently anti-racist, then we're not helping them. We're not pulling them into their future selves.
I want to say also, they think they're not racist, but that you just can't be not racist. You're either racist or you're anti-racist. And that sounds like a provocative statement, but if you think about it, and based on the discussions we've already had, that's what it is. People just want to be not racist. But that's because they really don't want to think deeply about how they really think.
Dave Francis here. I have a couple of comments. About 5 minutes or so, Mr. Janssen made a comment about the value, let's call it that way, the value or how the life of a Latino is appreciated against or versus the life of a Black, right? And as an Afro-Latino and a member of an Afro-Latino family, I can tell you that it's equal, if not worse than that. And I'm going to explain to you why. You see a lot of people in the streets right now making their point and expressing what they feel and what they believe in, which is fantastic. That's amazing. You see the same crimes and the same situation, the same persecution, the same mistreatment happens to the fellows Latinos that live in here, but the only difference is they are not able to go and demonstrate their pain, because if they do so, police is gonna come and take them out of this country. Earlier today, I was reading this article and they had some statistics, and one of those was mentioning that the ratio of African Americans with Social Security in the US versus those Latinos in here completely south and north. So that's part of it. In my mind, in my opinion, being a member of both communities, I can tell you for a fact that the situation is the same. One has a way to express the voice, the other one doesn't even have that one. So that's one comment. And then the other one is, Lou made a phenomenal point as well in terms of what happens when a brother kills a brother, Black kills a Black, right? Happens every day, happens not just in Chicago, happens all over the place. But we suffer less about that. We don't even talk sometimes about that. But wait for a white fellow to come and kill a Black guy, then the life of that fellow matters now. So that's something that we as a community should be talking about as well, because the problem is not just when someone outside of the Black circle comes and do something to our people. We should stop everything from happening, no matter where it's coming from. That's my comment right there.
Can I just make a comment here or ask a question? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Cardi.
Okay. Seeing the murder of Floyd, I think all of us felt different emotions: rage, anger. We're upset, wondering what we can do. But as a father of two young men in their 40s, approximately Floyd's age, I felt an anger that I had never felt before. But not only was I angry, and not only am I angry, it left me afraid. And I'm not quite sure why I should be afraid. I've lived in this community for 50 years and haven't felt that fear. This one has left me fearful, because I'm beginning to realize that could have been my son out there.
You know, Cardi, you say that you were afraid. Just as you were speaking, tears are welling up in my eyes. Again, I have been in this tearful state because you're thinking of your grown sons. And I think of my 12-year-old son, and that he's going to be driving in 4 years and he's going to be out on the streets, and, you know, that could happen to him easily, very easily. And that so many people around here in this area, Massachusetts is supposed to be a liberal state, but where I live, I'm surrounded by super duper conservatives, right-wing, populists, fascists, I don't know. And it scares me.
I don't know, but it has left me quite fearful for what could very easily happen.
All right, we want to move on.
Wonder if I should join you, Joyanne, and be CC.
Absolutely. I'm ready for the revolution.
We
Strapping
want to
up.
move on, but let's get back to this discussion. But before we move on from this question, let's have the Janssen, our guests, respond to this, wrap up on this question. We move on to the last question, and then we should have some time for open questions to come to some of this. But Janssen and David, please.
Okay, I'll go first since I don't know if it was Mr. Drackett, but he made a couple of interesting points, and so I want to make sure that no one misunderstands me. The work that I do in the Maryland Commission for Civil Rights, as well as being the former director of the Office of Human Rights here in Howard County, we're focusing on eradicating discrimination for all disenfranchised groups. But today we're here talking about Black Lives Matter. And so when I said, when I talked about historically, and I don't think the facts are against me on this one, historically here in America for four centuries, people of African descent, they have been on the lowest rung of the socioeconomic pool. Now, we can say that some people that are of Latino heritage, particularly when they're looking at their residency status, may have initial fears, but that does not implicitly mean that they have been marginalized. Now, let's not get it twisted. Latino people, the work that I do is primarily focused on Black and brown people, because Black and brown people in America are the ones that are the most disenfranchised. But he made a very interesting point, because just like me, when I walk around, I'm like, I'm Bajan, or someone's like, I'm from Jamaica, or I'm not American, I'm not a Black. He said he's Afro-Latino. In America, he's a Black man. In his culture, he celebrate his rich, diverse culture as much as he wants. But in America, when he identified as Afro-Latino, then he's a Black man in America. Whereas I know many Latino brothers and sisters that look more like my Aryan brothers and sisters, and they choose to identify as Aryan. My point is, like, based on the level of like a Latino from what is it, Argentina may not look like an Afro-Latino. And that's a lot to unpack here, because just looking at the history of South America, they have their own unique struggle when it comes to race, colorism, etc. But talking about the Black experience or the brown experience in America, Afro-Latino, I know some of my best friends are Panamanian and etc. And they Black. In America, they Black. But looking at, he went back to the Black on Black thing. I'm gonna say this as simply as possible. Most crime does not occur among strangers. It occurs among people in your community. Therefore, most crime will be, if you're in a majority white community, it will be inherently white on white, because you're going to attack, assault, murder someone that you know. That is and that is what happens. I lived in poor white communities. That crime is against white on white. Just like in a majority Black metropolis that is urban, the crime is going to be inherently Black on Black. But that's why you have this justice system, because most crime is actually, the perpetrator gets caught. So there's no need to sit back and have a protest on Black crime, just like there's no need to have a protest on white crime. And then to even come in and to bring it up, that's the same thing, that's the same logic as saying all lives matter. To bring it up and say, wait, we can't say Black Lives Matter, or we can't protest against police brutality because, look, there's criminality in humanity. Yeah, in the Black society. No, there's criminality in humanity. Like, white people kill white people all the time. Black people kill Black people all the time. Latino people kill Latino all the time. People kill the people they know. So the Black on Black crime, it's a I don't want to say it's silly, but it's a silly rebuttal, or it's a silly nuance that does not really apply.
David, are you still there? Do you want to wrap this up, and then we can get back to some open questions?
No, I think that the issue of the black on black crime is connected to what I will say in my remarks. So I won't comment anything further on that.
Okay, Deja.
Okay, that was wonderful discussion. But the final question is, if Jesus is coming, why does any of this matter? And here are some possible answers. And again, if there's something on the screen that isn't there that you think, by all means, share.
I would say that the answer is F, none of the above. And you know, I think Cardi is on here. He would probably agree with me. The reason why we should care is because if we're truly Christians and we want to follow Jesus's model, he left us clear instructions on what to do, right? So if you look at your Bible, Luke 4:18, Isaiah 58:6, Luke 4:18, Isaiah 58:6. Luke 4:18 says what Jesus was really here to do. He was here to free the captives, to minister to the poor, to bring hope to the hopeless. And then in Isaiah, when Isaiah was speaking to the nation that was oppressed, he was saying, look at the fast that I've created. I want you to loose the chains of injustice. I want you to untie the cords of those who are bound. I want you to share food with the hungry. And when you do that, you're doing my work. And that is the impetus for why we should care, right? We should care about that because it is what we're instructed to do. And this is a forum on social justice. So this is connected to what social justice actually is. Social justice is doing God's work, right? As Christians. And we absolutely should not be tying our hands and saying that we're going to survive here until Jesus comes, and then we'll just go up to heaven and everything will be okay. Those aren't the instructions that Jesus left for us. So I would say it's F.
I would quickly jump in and say the same thing. So Jeremy knows this is where I'll probably start to get a little hype, because when it comes to a lot of my work is in the legal civil rights arena, but like my passion has always been religious history. So in fact, that was one of my minors in college. It's fascinating, especially when you look at Adventism. Like I've heard that in the Adventist community. It's like, this world is not my home. Well, one, that statement's false. They talk about when we all get to heaven, my street of gold or streets of gold, depending on how you view that particular text. But if you look at Adventist eschatology or Adventist beliefs and how the judgment will occur, it's pretty clear that we're only supposed to be in heaven for a set period of time, 1,000 years, and then guess where we come back? We come back to earth restored, earth renewed, and that's where we spend eternity. So when Jesus came preaching the kingdom of heaven is at hand, like, we now as his hands and feet, we're supposed to be doing that. And I think that is the biggest issue in Adventism and in many other parts of the Christian faith. This lack of this need, this they don't have the impulse to respond to injustice. But that's replete throughout the Bible. David mentioned a couple of ones, but Psalms, this is David. Defend the poor and the fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. That's Psalms 82:3. Proverbs 31:9. Open thy mouth. Everyone knows Proverbs 31 for being the virtuous woman. Look at the rest of the book, the rest of the chapter above it. That entire thing is dealing with opening your mouth, judging righteously, pleading the cause of the poor and the needy. Jeremiah 22:3. Thus saith the Lord, execute ye judgment and righteousness, and deliver the spoiled out of the hand of the oppressor, and do no wrong. Like, if that's not a call to social justice on this very issue, I don't know what else is. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Romans 12:15. but I would actually probably go to one of my favorite verses, like Micah 6:8. God has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Justly love mercy, to pursue justice, to have mercy for others. Like, this is so implicit in the Christian faith, and it's so lost. It is so lost, and we need to get it back. We need to have a desire to be out there on the front lines, showing the world what love is, being the salt for this world. So I would agree with David. It's F.
Well, that closes out the trivia discussion portion. Now we'll turn it back over.
So I want Deja and Julaine to have an opportunity to ask a question. And we'll have a few minutes for open questions. We're pushing to 7 o'clock. If our guests can stay with us till 7, we'll try to wrap up by 6:50 or earlier if there are no questions, but I think we'll have a few questions. So David and Julaine, Julaine and Deja, can you kick us off with questions for our guests?
Jeremy, before they do,
okay.
There's something I absolutely wanted to slip into this conversation to actually frame it up a bit. When we're talking about systemic racism and the system of discrimination, I think that's been defined, but inaccurately or incompletely, especially when we consider the fact that what we view today was, this week, in terms of the protests, and last week in terms of the killing of that man. What we're actually talking about there and seeing is a consequence of mass incarceration, policing, and police brutality, and that is directly connected to the systemic discrimination that we're talking about. Right. So let me actually tie it up for you in 2 minutes. Right. So in a sense, when we viewed that video about redlining, and we talked about redlining and how it was tied to the inability of people to actually produce wealth, one of the consequences of redlining was the creation of ghettos. Right. And one of the things that you have to understand about the creation of ghettos is that when you physically concentrate people in one area, by law, you also concentrate the things that are associated with poverty, right? So there are two terms that you should actually be familiar with. The first term is called residential segregation, which we talked about we saw in that video, but the other one is called concentrated poverty. And so when you concentrate poverty residentially, again, you concentrate the things that are associated with poverty. So that is why you have things like high crime and other things in minority areas. And the important thing to understand is that those residential segregation was something that was created by law. It was deliberately created. Now, the important thing to understand is that as a result of these things called concentrated poverty and high crime, the government did things, created laws to actually deliberately combat what was going on in inner cities. And as a result of those laws that were created, they were not created to affect people equally. They were created to affect and to impact minority communities disproportionately. That is where you get the heavy-handed policing from, because the laws were created so that they could police people in ghettos. Now, the reason I say that is that what you viewed on that videotape was a consequence of exactly what I'm talking about, right? And I cannot help but remind you guys that when you actually viewed that video and people were actually yelling at the police officer to get off that young man's neck, the reason that he did not was because he didn't think he had a reason to. In other words, he felt that he was protected by the veil of the law. And the truth of the matter is he was, right? That's why he felt that he did not need to get up. And the truth is that his inability to get up was really connected to his being shielded by an entire system. So once you understand that, and you understand that heavy-handed policing and police brutality is connected to this thing called mass incarceration, where black people and brown people are locked up in mass, then you understand that this thing is truly systemic. And the last thing I'll say is that it is truly evil. And once you understand it to be evil, then you understand why Janssen and what he is saying is so important, right? That is exactly why we cannot remain in our churches. We have to actively get involved, and we have to actually get involved to actually correct the system. And correcting the system is exactly what social justice is all about. So that's the connection between what you saw on the screens and in your TV and the connection to social justice, right? If you care about what happened and you care about protecting your own children and protecting your own family members, then you must become involved. I cannot say it any more simply. Once you understand that the system was not created to protect you, it was created because it is inherently evil. Then you understand what's really going on here. And that's all I'll say.
Well said.
Dr. Court, I have a question for you.
Hi, Ray.
How are you doing?
Good.
What about when these inequities and these injustices exist in our church?
So the best way I could describe that is that, or answer that is that, I wrote a short piece on this for the Adventist Review, and it appeared in it appeared on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the people that wrote me back, I don't know where she's from. I'm gonna assume she's from somewhere in the Midwest. She said that she can't believe that, and she was referring to the encounter in Central Park. I hope you guys understand what I'm talking about. The encounter between the woman who had the dog and the black man. She said that she could not, and the reason I bring this up is because the woman responding to the article was an Adventist woman.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that she didn't understand why I couldn't put myself in the place of the white woman, because the white woman was scared that this man was accosting her. And she absolutely felt that she was just afraid, and that's why she was just reacting based on her fear. Now, the reason I bring that up is because it was a very revealing statement.
Mm-hmm.
It revealed that her being Adventist, and I would dare say white Adventist, is certainly no shield from what we're talking about. She is equally infected, right? She's definitely not anti-racist. And the way the only way I could answer you is that please don't make the mistake of believing that just because somebody went to the seminary and they are a leader in our church, that they are not equally infected by the disease that we're talking about.
Yeah.
They're probably actually more susceptible because they think that their training in the seminary and them going to Sabbath school all those years somehow inoculates them. That's the vaccine. But that's not the vaccine. And once you understand that, then you really understand that church people can be some of the most racist people that you come in contact with. And it's a really sobering point. So really, to answer your question, the inequities in the church need to be tackled in the same way, but it's often very difficult to do that because people in the church often don't know that they're sick. They think that they're perfectly well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everybody, hold your questions. We're gonna, Janssen, did you have any statements to make before we had Deja and Jelaine ask their questions, and then we get a few more?
With regard to what David said, or just generally?
No, just generally something that you wanted to share that you haven't had a chance to share yet.
Well, I mean, I think we want to, there's a lot of emotion when you talk about like what's happening. And I think we want to ultimately galvanize that. A commentator in the comments noted that, like thoughts on protests. I mean, some people are going to say, oh, they turned violent. Like Barack said, there were three types of people at these protests, people who are protesting and living within their right to peacefully assemble, to seek redress against the government. They're exercising their First Amendment rights. Then you have the looters. Those are the people that are bent, they're bent on destruction. And then you have the people with their own like particular agenda. They're just trying to agitate. But when you look at protests are critical to spurring action because they galvanize a body. If you don't believe me, look at the Tea Party. The Tea Party in 2008, they were just a bunch of protesters against the big bad Republican Party. They were ultra conservatives. 4 years later, they took over most of the Congress in terms of the House of Representatives. They became organized. And you know how they became organized? They focused on the issues that matter to them, and they went after it in a systemic way. And we can do the same thing. And we have to do the same thing. So I hope now you guys have a level of energy in terms of what we have to do something. But now you're wondering, what can we do? The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1965. Technically, under the law as it is written, most of these places you have rights. But we have equal rights on paper, but going back to what David said, like we have to focus, like what are the policies that are now in place? So you have to focus on, he talked about how ghettos came about, and so now you have these police departments with these heavy militaristic modalities. It's how they encounter people. So we have to demilitarize, I didn't say defund, but we have to demilitarize the police. We have to focus on community policing. I was at a rally 3 days ago marching with the police chief in my jurisdiction, Howard County, Maryland. It's a very diverse jurisdiction. The police chief is a Black female. She marched with the people, had a sign that said "Silence is complicity." And it was great. Her police officers, you have to have an associate's degree at least to get into the academy. Their standards are so high to get into. So you have a different caliber of people. They teach community policing. These are things that everyone can do. I'm talking about jurisdictions can do. Until then, we need to focus on how do we make them accountable police under the law. When you're done with this, go and Google law enforcement officers Bill of Rights. It's something that protects police from being fired, and they get governed by their own, which is why, and I for 3 years, I prosecuted police in that system. So I'm speaking from experience. We need to focus on getting civilian review boards. We need to focus on dismantling qualified immunity. I think Cory Booker recently introduced legislation, or he's putting together legislation to take away qualified immunity. Qualified immunity in a sentence is essentially like, it's just a complete absolute defense when it comes to civil litigation. You get prosecuted criminally, but then the family of the deceased individual will go and try to get some money. They typically lose under qualified immunity under that doctrine. So we need, and this is something that Republicans and Democrats are against. It's a doctrine that came about solely from the Supreme Court. It's not something under the law, because if you look at under the law, police officers or governmental actors, they are held to a high standard, a strict scrutiny standard. But it was only in 1966 that they decided to develop this doctrine of qualified immunity. I wonder why. Because it was the height of desegregation and the height of all the protests that were happening. And so the police were abusing people, sicking dogs on them, spraying water hoses on them. So now you have to protect all these people because they're exposed civilly they're exposed. So you create the qualified immunity doctrine, dismantle it, talk to your locally elected representatives. And that's where voting becomes so critical. Like, it becomes so critical. Know who your electeds are. Who are your county or city council members? Who represents you? Who are your state legislators? Who are your federal legislators? Like, we have to let those people know that we don't want qualified immunity. We want civilian review boards, because we can't let the police keep policing themselves. So those are just two issues that we can focus on in the short term to address the issue stemming from police brutality.
A brief definition again of qualified immunity, Janssen.
Oh, say it again?
Well, can you briefly again explain what qualified immunity is?
Okay, so again, it's a legal doctrine that was created by the Supreme Court, by federal law, that shields government officials from being sued for discretionary actions performed within their duties. So in other words, I'm a police officer, I was arresting you. Like, unless me knowing that this would have caused this type of injury or death, I was just doing my job. So as a result, I have qualified immunity because there's nothing, it's abhorrent, but I can tell you, unless we get rid of qualified immunity, the officer that killed George Floyd, when his family sues him civilly, will likely walk. Like he will likely not be found. Like that's why when you hear all the outrage of all the people, there's the criminal aspect, but then there's the civil aspect. And they walk away with no money from the county or the state or the police department because the officer was acting in his official capacity.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah,
Can I jump in
please.
here and say that there was a similar system in place that allowed General Pinochet to escape justice in Chile, a similar kind of immunity system. And I only bring that up to say how serious it is, right? That is how serious it is. And that is why we need to get involved, because it releases from liability some very bad people in terms of them paying for what they've done.
And these are things that we can, these are things that we can like change. I'm saying the House of Representatives as well as the Senate, they have both introduced legislation because this is a federal thing. This was created by federal, not even federal legislation, but by federal case law, the Supreme Court. So we pressure our federal legislators to create federal legislation that will defeat that legal doctrine. And there are there's a libertarian congressman who has introduced that legislation in the House, and Cory Booker, who's a Democratic senator, he's doing the same thing in the Senate. We need to reach out to our Congress people, to our senators, and tell them, I expect you to support this. And if they don't support it, November is coming. That's all I'm saying.
Well said.
All right. I really do want Deja and Jolene. If you want, you get first pick on questions. Then we'll open up for maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll wrap up.
So I wanted to hear more about like defunding the police, but I feel like from Janssen's, like the thing you just last said, it kind of explains what needs to happen before that. So I wanted to go back to something that we talked about like kind of towards the beginning. It's like, can Black people be racist? Because I've always like been supporting the argument that I am not being racist to someone else because I am Black, but I'm not completely sure if it's true. I've always thought it was true, so I'd like an actual explanation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a Supreme Court justice who is Black, who is a racist. I can't say it any more simply than that. When you understand that we're talking about a system and how that system is supported, then what you actually have is a Supreme Court justice whose votes enabled the system to continue for 25 years. If that's not the definition of a Black person being racist, I don't know what is.
Did you guys watch Get Out? So I view a Black racist as someone who is in the sunken place, like someone who they're so stuck in looking at the world through the framework of through racist lens, through the framework of the white majority, that they're not able to see how they perpetuate or reinforce these stereotypes. So yes, Black people or people of African descent, they can absolutely be racist because they have not been taught to love themselves. And because they don't love themselves or their heritage or their people, then they self-hate.
Okay.
And so yes.
I'm from another angle though. What if, I don't know, what if someone made like an off statement like, oh, I dislike white people, or oh, you had like a conversation with someone who's white and you disagree with what they're saying and they tell you that you're a racist when you're black, but you're just saying your opinion. Like, is that, I don't know if that can they call you a racist in that way?
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were saying initially you were talking about black on black, but you're saying can a white person say you're racist, or can, and that's something that comes up all the time. And the term for that is reverse racism, and I don't believe it to be a real thing. When you're can I as an individual harbor thoughts that say like I am superior and you're beneath me because I am black and you are white or some other race, and as a result I look down on you? Can you be racist in that manner? Yes. But if you're having a discussion with a person that controls the power and you're debating them and they say you're being racist, then is racism a construct only supported from a position of power? That's a great way to phrase it. I think that's why I don't believe reverse racism is a real thing. But can I, as an individual, harbor racist views on other people, whether it's towards Asians, towards other ethnic groups? Absolutely. But in terms of the way you questioned it, in terms of reverse racism, no, because I say, again, these are all about constructs. So if race is a construct, and we were created in the bottom end of that construct, we then can adopt the I call it white privilege. We can all take the pill of white privilege in order to live our best lives, to live freely, to walk freely, even though there are going to be consequences, because not everyone's going to want us to have that privilege. And those people that will rebel or try to rebut that, yes, those people are racist. And when you try to educate them on their racism, if they say this is not reverse racism, many people say affirmative action is reverse racism, and that's absolute silliness. Until, I'm not saying that reparations can occur in 2020 in the manner that it was originally designed to, but unless every black person that was freed after the Civil War ended in 1865 have received their 40 acres and a mule, then, and they did not, by the way, they did not. Unless that had occurred, then we wouldn't be here talking about these power systems or after slavery ended, then the 13th Amendment came out, and then all of a sudden, black people are in jail doing work for free. Like, it's the system.
If I can just jump in.
Esther, is it possible for you to hold your statement to your closing remarks? Or
sure,
you feel?
Sure.
Okay, all right.
No, let it go.
No, let me get to Deja. I really want to get to Deja in case she did have a question.
I mean, Auntie Esther can go.
Okay, Deja, go ahead. I'll tie it in. I'll find a way to tie it in.
We got to wrap up, everybody. This is good, and I know a lot of people have questions. But so if you have a question, I'll let you go, Esther, now. If you have a question, if you could use the raise your hand or put something in the chat, we'll try to read off those questions and ask our guests, and then we'll try to wrap up after that. So actually just put your questions in the chat if you have questions or comments, and after Esther goes.
So what you just explained resonates so much with me. And I'm appalled when my co-workers or people I supervise turn around and make comments that I'm racist. And what you just said is, it's reverse. Clearly they're the ones that's struggling, and so that I get discouraged or frustrated and not deal with the issue at hand, these things are being said to deter me. But this serves to fuel me that I must not sit down and let it happen, regardless of the struggles that I may encounter in doing it. And I think on a broader sense, we have been saying for some time things need to be done. People need to be educated. people need to be supported, and things need to be ongoing to effect change. Otherwise, I'm afraid we could just be talking again. So at Northboro, I think for the long term and everywhere, we need to find ways to put all those things in place to bring about the change.
And if I can quickly jump in to respond to Esther, this stuff is long, and this is messy, and this is hard, and you have to commit yourself. I mean, like right now, as I've been on this, the president of the state NAACP has been texting me because I have partnered with the NAACP and my church to expand our garden so that we can go out and grow nutrient-dense foods to help people that live in this community that would be impacted by COVID and the recession, to make sure that they're getting nutrient-dense foods. So like that takes time. I mean, and it takes money, it takes sweat. You have to go out there on your weekends to grind. But if you're committed to justice, if you're committed to doing good, or if you're committed to realizing, even from a theological perspective, that we are Christ's hands and feet, then it becomes an imperative. This is our mission. Like, I feel like I am here, if Jesus preached that the kingdom of heaven was at hand, and if we are supposed to be his fruit, if we're supposed to be his hands and his feet, then it becomes, in this area, it becomes critical that we interact. So look for the civic organizations that you have in your community, and then see how you can participate, because a lot of times people are not volunteering. It's so much easier to sit back, complain about the problem, say, oh, all this black on black crime. Okay, well then, why don't you go and educate the youth? Why don't you go and show them a different way? Like, this stuff is hard, and it's messy, and it's dirty, and it's gonna challenge our conceptions on how we view God and religion, etc. So, I mean, I do it because I believe in environmental justice. My wife teases me because I'm always telling her to compost. I'm like on the board of a Howard County Conservancy, which deals with educating about preserving wild spaces. But for me, the real mission is I want to infuse them into focusing on environmental justice. Because again, look at urban areas where you have these ghettos. Do you have green spaces? Do you have parks to go and walk your dog? Do you have, when you go to your corner stores, it's like lottery tickets, it's liquor, it's junk food. Is it fresh vegetables? You see, like, this stuff is so complicated and intertwined. And it's like, so that's why the most important thing we can do is educate ourselves on this history so that we can then become change agents. Again, I'm a geek, I'm a sci-fi geek, but the Matrix, I'm not acting like I'm Neo, I'm not acting like I'm Morpheus, but I believe that we can all be architects in this system. We can restructure and we can rebuild this matrix. And even if we don't see it rebuilt, like, it will encourage the children. It will encourage the youth. Like, the youth are, whether you're LGBTQ, whether you're atheist, whether you're whatever, the youth are the ones that are out here demanding this change to happen. And it's going to happen by any means necessary.
So I'm so hurt to have to wrap up this conversation. And that's really a good place, because I wanted to share that yesterday in the town where I live, which is about 2% Black, 30% Asian, and the rest mostly white, they were driving by, they had a parade before their graduation. I saw a lot of Black Lives Matter signs, and I think there's something hopeful with what's happening now. I think the youth get it. As David said, this is pure evil. This is not about Black versus white. This is at its core an evil thing. And now we have a moment, and our youth want to get involved. And so my last question for both of you, maybe just give us one practical thing. Well, Janssen mentioned speaking about qualified immunity and speaking to our Congress people. But if Janssen and David can each give us one last practical thing before Esther wraps up for us, Janssen and David, you're invited to come back, and we really hope that you can find some time to do it again. There are other questions that I'm gonna try to get you guys to answer and send as a group or post somewhere for the church. But one practical thing from each of you, and then Esther will wrap us up.
So Deja and Julaine are going to college, and you know, the freedom fighters in the 60s, they were primarily you guys' age. When you get to college, you have to start building a culture of getting involved in something related to social justice. So when you think of what social justice is actually getting at, it's actually tearing down these structures of oppression. Which kinds of organizations that you ask yourself, which kind of organizations can I get involved with that specifically are thinking about doing that? So one of the things you could think about doing, for example, is getting involved in an organization that actually educates Black people who have been locked up in prison. Right? That's one thing to do, one practical thing, things like that. Janssen is very involved in environmental justice, and he could give you some other practical things. But one of the things you've got to think of is when you actually go to college, what can I do? And then finally, for people who are going to be left behind at Northboro, there are really practical things that you can do. You have to vote. You must vote. And you have to do it this November. And this is not incorrectly melding church and state. This is practical stuff. If you don't vote and get people to represent your interests, somebody else will.
That's right.
Okay, Janssen, can you speak to a younger age as well? Kids who can't vote, who are not going to college. We have a lot of early teens in our church.
Yeah. So for them, they need to focus on excellence, and I mean that in terms of academic excellence, in terms of community service. Just focus on learning your history, understand your history, because you may not have the ability to just get up and go wherever you want to at this point because you're a teenager. But once you educate yourselves, you will then figure out where you can then apply. And this is the most important thing for whether you're young or you're old. Where do you want to apply your passion? We all have a passion. Some people, it seems like a lot of Caribbean people in here, which means y'all can cook, which means many of y'all probably garden. So like me, as a young boy in Barbados, my grandmother used to grow everything. And then when I finally became an adult, one day I started growing. And now I manage my church's garden. I started a garden with the NAACP, and I still have my own garden. I love to garden. But I realized that there are many of our people that don't understand the importance of gardening. And so it's like I started saying, let me apply my passion here. I work in local government. So I saw someone make a comment, and I completely gutted my little bio because I hate when a lot of Adventist introductions are all like these huge resumes. But I'm an assistant chief administrative officer for my county. I deal with government operations. I sit at the table when the county exec, the elected official, is talking about who will he appoint as a department head. So I'm involved in that top level of decision making. I'm involved in making the policies. I handle the labor relations for my county. So I'm the ones that negotiate with the police and their collective bargaining agreements. But I also, while we make sure we give them their money, their 2%, their 3% COLAs, cost of living adjustments, I make sure we put policies in there that deal with no use of force. Howard County does not have, we cannot do a chokehold. Even though it's legal in the state, my county's, the police department cannot do that. It is in the policies, and that their entire culture is against that. And you know how that happened? It happened because people went out and they voted for their local. Like we see President Trump and we despise him, but that's federal. Get him out of office. But when your roads are messed up, your trash is not getting picked up, when the stuff in your community is not happening, that's on me. That's on the people that work in local government. So you need to elect people that will appoint people like me in those positions. Because if you are not at the dinner table, you are on the menu. And so once I understood that and I educated myself and I tried to emancipate myself as best for mental slavery, it's why I left private practice. I'd be making way more money, and sometimes my wife reminds me, I'd be making way more money if I was in private practice. But I went into public service because I knew, like, I can make that change there. So, and you guys can too. You don't have to be the decision maker, but you appoint the decision maker. And I do it's something I've learned I was one of 2 black males in my law school, majority white. And I learned that liberal white women, they will complain like all get out. They will, if something's wrong, they will send an email. They will call. I said, you know what? Let me start doing that. So when I go to Chipotle and I waited in line too long, I call them. And I get 2 free meals now. I complain like all get out. Even to my local elected officials, my state officials, I know who your representatives are, and do not shoot off an email in a second. Once you understand you have this power and you can wield it, it is freeing. White privilege is part of this construct, and it's really colorblind. Operate within that. Operate as if you're free to live your best life, and then bring in people that will implement the policies that you want them to do. There's so many other things that we can do. We can talk about on an economic level that I don't know how liberal this church is, but I also, I may never get invited after saying this, but Second Amendment. We have a right to bear arms, but for some reason, we don't. I sleep with my machete under my bed. It's not a game. Go out and educate yourself on your right. Bear arms. So again, I hope I get invited back. I think this is a multi-part conversation, but I'm going to try to go back to being very nice and PC.
Preach on, brother. Preach on, brother. Preach on.
David, is that why you got a dog?
I've often wanted to be like Joanne. It's just, I absolutely want to be like Joanne. She's one of my favorites, and she knows that.
Listen, from close range to a mile away, I got you. That's all I got to say.
The Lord is good. Okay.
We're talking particular weapons now. For home defense, 357.
Don't start me.
Write the book, Janssen. Now, speaking of books, before we close and Esther takes over, as I said, I had Kara read the books stamped. And that's the book where I learned about anti-racism. And again, I'll send the PowerPoint slides around. We'll put in David and Janssen's answers in the notes section for the youth to understand, but for all of us to understand that at the end of the day, Black people, white people, no matter what, you have to love yourself, but you love others. And if you just start there, right? And if you have enough empathy to call something what it is, Black Lives Matter with no qualifications, that's love and empathy. So it's a great place to start, but we have to educate ourselves. And we need to encourage our young people to read, study, educate themselves, in addition to doing whatever they can to be politically active or active in their communities, whether you call it politically or not. So Esther, can you wrap us up with a comment and with reflections and a prayer?
Thank you, everybody, for joining this program. Jelaine and Deja and others in the AY department, thank you for leading the way. Others of us were talking and still in the midst of planning to execute a program such as this, but because of your efforts, it's now history. David Court, your name did come up in the other group, and I'm delighted that you are able to be home with us. Janssen, I feel like you're a brother. You were just out there in Maryland somewhere. So thank you for your time this afternoon, sharing it with us here at Northboro.